Do we truly know the people around us? We often believe we can identify when someone is toxic, when an energy feels heavy, or when behavior crosses the line. But what if the real dangers aren't obvious? What if the most destructive people are often the charming, the kind, even those who are family? While we focus on guarding ourselves from the clear villains, we may unknowingly open the doors of our minds to something far more dangerous, the unconscious of others invading our own. Carl Gustav Jung dedicated his life to studying these hidden dynamics. In his work, The Ego and the Unconscious, he reveals that much of what truly governs us is beyond our conscious control. This is not just about you, it's about everyone. And that's where the danger lies. When someone is blind to their own darkness, their shadow seeks a host, and often, that host is you. Perhaps you've never thought about this before, but take a moment to reflect. How many times have you felt emotionally drained after talking to someone? How many times have you been blamed for something you didn't do, or made to feel responsible for a tragedy that wasn't even yours? Jung called this projection a mechanism where others project onto you what they refuse to see in themselves. From that point on, you cease being a person and become a symbol, a mirror, an imaginary enemy, an idealized hero. The common thread in all of these projections? None of them are truly you. What's most frightening, though, is that often you don't even realize you're caught in this dynamic. You think you're helping, being empathetic or mature, but in reality, you're sinking into a psychological trap, trying to resolve conflicts that aren't yours, manipulated by forces you didn't create, yet now control you. And this isn't limited to ill-intentioned people. Jung made it clear. The greatest dangers don't come from conscious perverts, but from unconscious ones. These are people alienated from their own psyche, dominated by masks, traumas, complexes, and repressed desires. They're not evil, they're dangerous. And their danger is silent. It doesn't come barging through the door. It sneaks in slowly through small comments, veiled accusations, and loaded silences until you start to doubt yourself. And when you lose contact with your own psychic reality, you become part of their shadow. Perhaps you're experiencing this right now, whether in a relationship, a friendship, a work environment, or even within your own family. Maybe you're blaming yourself, wondering what's wrong with you. The answer is simple, nothing. But there is something deeply wrong with the way you're being used as a vessel for someone else's unconscious. In this video, we'll explore 6 types of emotionally dangerous people that Jung would identify. These individuals act not with deliberate malice, but driven by internal forces they themselves don't understand. That's what makes them so destructive. We'll delve into Jung's own words and concepts directly from his works like Ion, the Ego and the Unconscious, and Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious to help you recognize these profiles. But more importantly, we'll open your eyes to the possibility that perhaps, just maybe, one or more of these profiles exists within you too. Are you ready? Take a deep breath and move forward. But be warned, once you hear this, you won't be able to look at people or even yourself the same way again. Imagine living with someone who blames you for everything they feel, who turns your very presence into a trigger, who makes you responsible for emotions you never caused. At first, they seem fragile, sensitive, deep. But over time, you realize you're being dragged into a battlefield that isn't yours, and you're already at a disadvantage. This is the unconscious manipulator, someone unaware of their own wounds, but who projects them onto others as a form of psychic survival. Jung said, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will encounter as fate." And often that fate has a name, a face, and shares the table with you. The unconscious manipulator is dominated by repressed content, unintegrated traumas, and unprocessed emotional fragments. Instead of looking inward, they target you, turning you into a canvas for their internal conflicts. This person lives in a state of chronic projection. Jung explained that projection is an inevitable function of the psyche, but if left unrecognized, it becomes destructive. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he stated that projection causes a kind of psychic blindness, a prison where the other ceases to be seen for who they truly are and is instead used as a symbol of what is hidden within them. This is exactly what the unconscious manipulator does. They don't see you for who you are. They see a lost part of themselves and react to it as if it were real. These people often position themselves as victims. Everything that happens is someone else's fault, never theirs. When they feel anger, it's because, and that's when manipulation occurs, without a shout, without a direct request. It's emotional, unconscious, and incredibly effective. Worse still, these people are often charming. They have charisma, sensitivity, and an emotional intensity that pulls you in. This creates a trap because you think you can help them, heal them, or understand them better than anyone else. But what you're actually doing is sacrificing your own psychic health, trying to rescue someone who refuses to dive into their own psyche. And the more you try, the deeper you sink. Jung warned that these patterns of projection are especially dangerous because they place us in a symbolic role: savior, enemy, traitor, father, mother, anything but who we truly are. Living in this symbolic bond is living in an illusion. You cease to be seen as a person and are treated as a distorted reflection of the other's unconscious. The only way to protect yourself from the unconscious manipulator is to develop awareness. Recognize the patterns, cut the invisible threads connecting you to their emotional narrative, and constantly ask yourself, is what I'm feeling truly mine, or has it been induced? The unconscious manipulator doesn't invade your life violently. They slip in through the gap of your empathy. And once you recognize this pattern, the next step is to understand how it disguises itself even more deeply under the mask of the persona. In the next section, we'll dive into the bearer of the persona, someone who not only projects, but lives to appear as something they are not. We'll explore how this represents one of the greatest psychological risks Jung pointed out, because while the unconscious manipulator throws their conflicts onto you, the bearer of the persona can drag you into a world where you forget who you really are. You provoked it. When they're sad, it's because you disappointed them. When they feel inferior, it's because you think you're superior. This distortion is so subtle that it leaves you questioning yourself. Was I really insensitive? Did I say something wrong? Am I toxic? And that's when manipulation occurs, without a shout, without a direct request. It's emotional, unconscious, and incredibly effective. Worse still, these people are often charming. They have charisma, sensitivity, and an emotional intensity that pulls you in. This creates a trap because you think you can help them, heal them, or understand them better than anyone else. But what you're actually doing is sacrificing your own psychic health, trying to rescue someone who refuses to dive into their own psyche. And the more you try, the deeper you sink. Jung warned that these patterns of projection are especially dangerous because they place us in a symbolic role: savior, enemy, traitor, father, mother, anything but who we truly are. Living in this symbolic bond is living in an illusion. You cease to be seen as a person and are treated as a distorted reflection of the other's unconscious. The only way to protect yourself from the unconscious manipulator is to develop awareness. Recognize the patterns, cut the invisible threads connecting you to their emotional narrative, and constantly ask yourself, is what I'm feeling truly mine, or has it been induced? The unconscious manipulator doesn't invade your life violently. They slip in through the gap of your empathy. And once you recognize this pattern, the next step is to understand how it disguises itself even more deeply under the mask of the persona. In the next section, we'll dive into the bearer of the persona, someone who not only projects, but lives to appear as something they are not. We'll explore how this represents one of the greatest psychological risks Jung pointed out, because while the unconscious manipulator throws their conflicts onto you, the bearer of the persona can drag you into a world where you forget who you really are. In the next part, the video delves into an archetype that Carl Jung identified as one of the greatest obstacles to psychic freedom: the guardian of virtue, who deep down hides their own demons. Not every executioner carries a sword. Some wield crosses, rules, dogmas, and ready-made phrases. These individuals claim to be driven by ethics, righteousness, and morality. However, Beneath the surface, they imprison both themselves and others within a cage made of guilt and shame. Jung was acutely aware of this archetype. He believed that when morality is used as a facade, it becomes one of the most insidious forms of psychic repression. This is the case with the moral controller, someone who, instead of integrating their shadow, projects it onto the behavior of others and condemns them for what they refuse to accept in themselves. Viewers might have encountered someone like this, individuals who frequently point fingers but never look inward. They position themselves as a model for behavior, not because they truly are, but because they desperately need to maintain an image of moral superiority. According to Jung, the greater the repression, the more intense the need to project the shadow. This is exactly what the moral controller does. They transform others into sinners, deviants, or immoral figures to avoid confronting their own desires, impulses, and contradictions. The problem is that, unlike a typical emotional manipulator, the moral controller believes they are doing good. They genuinely think they are correcting, saving, or educating others. This belief makes their influence even more toxic because it is cloaked in authority, good intentions, and false spirituality. Criticism often comes with phrases like, "It's for your own good," "You'll thank me later," or "Someone needs to tell you the truth." But this truth is not neutral. It is laden with projection. In his book Ion, Jung extensively discusses the figures of Christ and the Antichrist as archetypes of wholeness and dissociation. The moral controller believes they embody the light, completely ignoring their own darkness. They project evil onto others to maintain the illusion of purity within themselves. This, in turn, blinds them to the nuances of the human soul, making them dangerous. Living with someone like this can create a constant feeling of guilt, almost as if the individual is always wrong. Even when simply existing, a person may feel watched, judged, or diminished. The most perverse aspect of this dynamic is that often this judgment becomes internalized. The person begins to repress parts of themselves that are natural, human, and spontaneous, molding themselves to an ideal that is not theirs. The morality of the other becomes a prison. This dynamic is common in families, religions, and rigid environments where obedience is confused with virtue. Jung saw this pattern as a real threat to the process of individuation. In places where excessive moralism exists, there is often an absence of self-knowledge. The extreme moralist does not seek truth, they seek control. And when they cannot control the external world, they begin to control the internal world of those around them. But the moral controller is not the only one driven by unconscious forces. There is another type that is even more volatile, unstable, and unpredictable: the complex individual. While the moralist represses and projects, the complex person is entirely dominated by unconscious contents, reacting from them like an emotional puppet. The next segment dives into this explosive territory where consciousness loses control and traumas take the wheel of the psyche. This is the territory where a person may embrace you one day and destroy you the next, without even understanding why. Imagine living with someone who, at one moment, is sweet, affectionate, and generous, and in the next explodes in anger, shuts down in silence, or accuses you of something that never crossed your mind. A compliment turns into a demand. A joke becomes aggression. A gesture of affection is interpreted as a threat. No matter what is done, it seems as if the ground is always unstable. This is the experience of those living with someone dominated by unconscious complexes. For Jung, complexes are autonomous nuclei of emotion and memory that reside in the unconscious. These complexes can take control of consciousness at any moment, like fragmented personalities within us, created by traumas, psychic wounds, and unresolved experiences. In Psychological Types and the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung describes how these complexes can directly interfere with a person's behavior, causing them to react not to the present, but to echoes of the past. A simple comment might unconsciously trigger an old wound, and those around them will pay the price. The complex person does not realize they are being guided by these internal forces. When they react with fury, extreme sadness, or exaggerated resentment, they believe they are being rational, but they are not. They are reliving undigested emotions. The problem lies in the unpredictability of this dynamic. Emotional explosions are interspersed with moments of lucidity, affection, or regret. This makes the relationship with someone like this even more confusing and addictive. The person may think they are not always like this. Sometimes they are wonderful, and this hope keeps them hooked. But those good moments are often followed by unpredictable emotional ruptures. In an attempt to restore harmony, the individual starts to mold themselves to avoid these outbursts. They avoid certain topics, measure their words, and walk on eggshells, trying not to trigger the hidden monster. The brutal truth is, however, that the monster is always there, latent, hungry, and waiting for any trigger to emerge. Jung believed that unrecognized complexes colonize the psyche, speaking for the individual, feeling for them, acting for them. The complex person is frequently overtaken by these forces. They may be dominated by a complex of inferiority, martyrdom, abandonment, or persecution. These complexes carry their own narratives, emotions, and demands, and the more a person tries to maintain peace, the more they feed the illusion that it is possible to control the uncontrollable. Living close to someone like this means living in constant alertness. There is never emotional stability, and the present is always contaminated by ghosts of the past. Eventually, one begins to absorb these ghosts, doubting oneself, their memory, and their feelings, all while unknowingly being colonized by the other's unconscious. However, there is a more dangerous type still. While the complex person swings between emotional extremes, there exists another type who does not shout, explode, or accuse, but quietly consumes your energy until nothing remains. In the next and final section, we will talk about the psychic vampire, those who feed on your time, attention, and empathy, leaving you exhausted, drained, and empty. This will be the final revelation in this cycle, shedding light on Jung's true understanding of how to break free from this unconscious jungle. Some individuals don't want your presence, they want your energy. They drain it not with violence or aggression, but through subtle demands, chronic victimhood, and emotional dependency disguised as affection. This is the psychic vampire, the most silent and insidious form of emotional draining that Jung ever warned about, even if not by that name. In Jungian terms, this is the symbol of an unresolved symbiotic relationship, a pathological bond that hinders psychic growth and dissolves the boundaries of the self. Jung pointed out that one of the greatest threats to the individuation process, the path toward wholeness, is symbiotic relationships where two people no longer recognize themselves as separate individuals, but as extensions of one another. The psychic vampire thrives in this kind of bond. They need constant attention, comfort, and availability, but behind this need is a void that cannot be filled by anyone. At first, the person offers support, then time, and eventually tolerates emotional abuse in the name of understanding. But slowly, they realize that all their energy is being drained, and they no longer know where the other person ends and they begin. The exhaustion isn't just physical, it's existential. It feels as though the soul is being devoured drop by drop, day after day. Jung described individuals who, unable to sustain themselves psychically, latch onto others like emotional parasites. The most dangerous aspect is not just the exhaustion, it's the dissolution of the self. The individual begins to feel guilty for wanting space, selfish for wanting silence, and cold for wanting distance. The psychic vampire is a master at reversing roles. They become the accuser, the manipulator, while the other becomes the victim. Jung teaches us that to make the unconscious conscious is the path to true freedom. This applies to both ourselves and others. Perhaps at some point, you too have been a psychic vampire, a complex person, or someone living behind a persona. None of us is immune. We all have a shadow and we all have pain. The difference lies in who has the courage to look within and who chooses to project their weight onto others. This video is a mirror reflecting the dynamics that bind, hurt, and keep us unconscious. If you've made it this far, it means you are ready to see, to name, and to break free. And this is the first and most powerful form of freedom. It's not about blaming others, it's about stepping out of the hostage position and reclaiming sovereignty over your own psyche. Now, I want you to participate. Leave in the comments which of these profiles you faced, and which do you honestly perceive within yourself. Your comment could be the beginning of awareness for both you and those who read it. Before you go, remember, the next video is just as essential. It will take you even deeper into this journey of self-knowledge. Keep watching, because the more light we shed on the unconscious, the less it controls us. See you there.